And I'll call the meeting to order of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It's Monday, October 9th, 2017 at 6:30 p.m. We are at the Oregon School District Innovation Center at the high school. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney? Present. Ms. Odorico? Ms. Flanagan?
Present.
Mr. Raymond?
Mr. Raymond's entering now. We can call him again, he'll say aye.
Mr. Raymond?
Here.
Mr. Kraus?
Yo.
Mr. LeBrun?
Present.
And Mr. Zach?
Present, and I would note that Mrs. Odorico is out of town. She finished a 100-mile bike ride on behalf of Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation and is on her way back. So she had notified me earlier that she would not be here this evening. Board has a quorum. I have proof that the meeting has been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin Open Meetings Law, and those proofs will be with Ms. Wick if anyone wants to inspect them. Need a motion to approve the agenda this evening. That's before you. Do I have that motion? Mr. Raymond with the motion, Mr. LeBrun with the second. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries by unanimous voice vote. Consent calendar, agenda item A. Is there any item on the consent calendar that any board member wishes to remove? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar. Ms. Feeney with the motion, Mr. LeBrun with the second. All those in favor, Janie, we don't have any contracts,
No.
do we? All those
Oh,
in,
we've got,
we have donations too that I want to mention. We have 5 donations. One is the Coral Boosters have donated to Brooklyn approximately $50 for supplies. Cynthia Mealy donated $100 for winter gear for students. The Oregon Community Bank donated $1,000. I think it was to Rome Corners of the middle school. Rome Corners, yeah, for the Greens initiatives as part of their PBI's character assembly. Rotary donated $400 from their weekly collection to give to the homeless children in Oregon, and that went through Cynthia D. Camelli. And then Patricia Erstad donated a treadmill that had a new value of approximately $2,000. So we thank them for their donations and support of the Oregon School District. So we have a contract that we have to call roll. We can do it by voice vote. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Items on the consent calendar are approved by unanimous voice vote. Agenda item B, Board Policy 180.04 affords community members with the opportunity to address the board. Is there any member of the community that's registered with you, Mrs. Wick?
no.
Okay, is there any member of the community wishing to speak? Seeing none, we'll move to number C and information items. OEA report, and we have a report from Nathan Johnson. Yeah, why don't you go over and sit where Courtney is and use that mic. And Nathan, there's a little button there to speak into.
All right. I'm Nathan Johnson. I'm a teacher at the high school and a member of the Oregon Education Association Board of Directors. And I'm here tonight just to speak briefly on the calendar options before the board later tonight. I'd just like to give a little input in terms of where we've been and where the OEA believes we should go with contemplating these decisions. So of the calendar options in front of the board tonight for information, one of those options includes the idea of seniors graduating before the end of school. So what that would look like is graduation would happen and there's potentially up to 3 school days remaining after the seniors have graduated. So I'd just like to give a little background there, which is one reason that the calendar committee decided not to pursue this option and forward it out of the committee is that impacting how seniors take their semester exams is not only a calendar decision, but an instructional practice decision. And so it very well could impact whether seniors are taking exams, whether they have to find a way to arrange them early, and other instructional practices that could be impacted at the end of the year in terms of what it looks like for seniors to finish out the year. So I'd just like the board to be aware of where we're at with this, and that having seniors not take second semester exams next year would set a precedent then for the following year that at that point it would be almost like trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube. That if last year's seniors didn't take second semester exams, and then the next year's seniors are like, well, last year they didn't take exams second semester, so why are we? So I'd just like to make it really clear to the board here that if we're considering looking at how semester exams are done for seniors second semester, that it certainly is a larger instructional practice decision than just one calendar as well. So I'd just like to take it in a very considered way as we have that conversation. And I'd like to also ask then that the OEA would like to strongly encourage the board to explore this option in a considered manner and include the high school faculty in any decision that's going to deeply impact our instructional practice at the high school. So I just wanted the board to be aware of where we're at with that and the OEA's position on making sure there's a deeper conversation for this calendar if we're considering something that's going to change our instructional practice at the high school.
Thank you. And since it is a agenda item, I think it's appropriate if anybody has any questions, rather than bring it back up at that time, it would be appropriate if anyone has any questions of Nathan at this time. If not, we can always bring you back in on the agenda calendar if anyone has that. Okay, thanks very much. Student report. And Carolyn and I talked, we're meeting on Wednesday, and we're gonna kind of go over what board roles are for student members and talk about kind of what we want to hear during student reports. And so we'll do that. Anything earth-shattering that you want to talk about tonight? Okay, good. I look forward to having coffee with you. And we're going to try to meet, if we can, with the rep for second semester as well. So it's been a busy year so far, and you're still in swimming, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, that takes us to action items. D1 is 660301 School to Career Program Contract. And Brian, is this you or Andy?
That is me. Board members, you have seen this before. This is our School to Career program that's signed by, I believe, almost all of the Dane County school districts. It's a program that's been around for 25 plus years, and we are recommending your approval.
Good. And Gina, have you looked at the contract from legal standpoint? And does that meet your approval? Any questions of Brian or Gina with respect to the School to Career Program contract? Dan?
Are there any changes from last year?
No, there's none.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I'd need a motion then to approve the School to Work contract. That's before the board. Ms. Flanagan with the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Kraus with the second. Is there any further discussion or questions regarding this? Seeing none, Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Flanagan? Yes. Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond? Ms. Feeney? Yes. Mr. Zak?
Yes, motion carries 6-0. We have an approved contract, and we'll make arrangements to have it appropriately signed and forwarded. Item D2 is from Policy Committee, reviewing revisions to 440 student internet use, and that's Ms. Flanagan on behalf of the Policy Committee. The floor is yours.
I'll turn it over to Gina. She can explain. There's not a lot of changes, just some legalese and some things that we had discussion about.
Sure. So the reason that we brought this to Policy Committee as a recommendation is that we have been going through our permissions in Infinite Campus that parents give us. And one of the ones that can be rather old is the policy required that parents consent to students' internet use. And that's been in there quite a long time. And at the time that policy went into effect, which is before me, and I'll see if, and John, you're welcome to correct me, is that the internet was a new educational tool and we didn't rely on it as much as we do now. And so what we discovered in going through IC is we had a number of parents that had said no, maybe when their students were much younger. But now really the way that we do education and the way that the internet is in our society, it's very difficult for students to have the same educational experience as other students if their parents have said no to internet use. And so how we've been handling that in the past is we've actually been calling all of those no's to talk about how we do education at that particular grade level and to see if we can secure parent consent. And I think there's only been one parent that has still said no with some questions, and then once Mr. Tanner talked to him, he understood it and he did consent. And so we realized that we really have an outdated policy based on how much we use the internet now. So we were asking the policy committee to really update that. And so there's no legal reason to require a parent's consent to use the internet for educational purposes. So we wanted to really modernize our policy.
Great, and Krista, did this, was this subject to a motion at the policy committee? Yes. Okay. Are you moving then the changes that we have before us on behalf of the policy committee?
I am.
Okay. Janie, if you'd make note of the policy committee's motion. Does any board member have any questions of Krista or Gina with respect to the proposed changes to policy 440? I'm seeing none, and we have a motion on behalf of the policy committee, which does not need a second, and so seeing no questions or interest in further discussion, Janie, would you call the roll with respect to approving the changes brought by the policy committee?
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond? Mr. Kraus? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Mr. Zach?
Yes, those revisions are approved 6-0. Thanks, Gina and Krista, for advancing those. Action, actually, we're now into discussion items, leaving action items, committee reports. Krista, for policy.
We have nothing further other than that, and then we meet later this month.
Great. Jeff, Vision Steering Committee.
We met on the 20th of September and received a report from Mark Roffers on the population, on the student population growth report. And we'll be meeting next Wednesday, the 18th at 7:30.
Thank you. Any questions of either committee chair from the board? Seeing none, we'll move on to information items F. First item on that is F1 is 2017 preliminary budget, and the intent of this is to give the board background in terms of our budget options from administration. This will be on the agenda for our October 23rd meeting for approval. So when Brian and I talked, I indicated a preference to get a sense from Brian of what the thinking was so that we'd have an opportunity to review that and ask any questions at this time or in the interim before our October 23rd meeting. So Brian, the floor is yours.
You'll notice something's a little different. We have the budget summary on one page, and that's only because I put it together, and there's not a lot of detail. But let me explain the reason that there's not a lot of detail. You'll recall at the annual meeting, Andy shared the good news that the state of Wisconsin approved, or the governor approved the budget at $200 for the first year and $204 at the second year, and he provided you and community members with an estimate of about $450,000 of unallocated funds. Andy's in the process now of working with his staff and making sure all of our budget categories and line items are correct when we come back at October 23rd. So I offered to put this together based on a conversation that Steve and I had, and you will notice its simplicity. I want you to have a few takeaways for tonight. Takeaway number one is we have $450,000 of additional spending authority. Takeaway number two, as Steve and I were visiting on this, I laid out really three paths. One path would be to spend funds only on one-time projects, and you've heard Andy use that phrase a number of times. A one-time project is something that we would spend the money on this year, and then in subsequent years we would have that budget capacity to spend those funds on perhaps an ongoing project. The prime example, something we've been working on as a priority, which the board approved, is our teacher compensation plan. Using one-time only projects is a very conservative approach, and it saves $450,000 of spending authority when Andy and our team puts together the 18-19 school budget. Another option or another recommendation is one-time spending and monies for ongoing projects or something that's in the budget past the 17-18 school year. And then lastly, spending all of the funds on ongoing projects that would go this year as well as into the future. I can tell you right now the administrative team has wrestled with this, and we're not going to recommend spending all of the $450,000 on ongoing spending. So far, it's likely we meet again tomorrow morning, but it's likely we will have one recommendation for spending ongoing funds that will not exceed $50,000, and then the balance, or $400,000, will be one-time only projects. We don't have those one-time only projects completely summarized yet, but my plan would be to get them out to you after this meeting so you have them in plenty of time in advance of the October 23rd meeting. Some other information, and this just happens to be a few items that Steve and I talked about. You'll recall Andy gave us a really good estimate of equalized valuation with 5.5%. I know it must have almost hurt his finger to type in 5.5% because he is usually super conservative with that. And frankly, to me, that was an aggressive estimate, and we were able to beat that and actually get a 6.5% increase, which shows the strength of our local economy and the strength of our housing market here in Oregon. When Andy translates that into property tax mill rate, which eventually turns into a property tax bill for everyone that's a resident, in September at our annual meeting, his projection was $11.62, and now with the increase in equalized valuation, we're at $11.56. So we were able to drop that a little bit. I'm sure it never drops as much as elected officials might like for it to drop, but by comparison with other districts, we're in a really strong financial sense, and our property tax mill rate is relatively low, even though we brought on additional debt. So the key takeaways, we have $450,000 of additional spending. Our recommendation, we're only going to ask to spend less than $50,000 of that on ongoing projects, and the balance of $400,000 on one-time money, which means we start the 18-19 budget year with $400,000 in the kitty, so to speak, that's not allocated, that we can use for projects next year. If I were to say where would that go, likely it's going to go into staffing because we're seeing increased student enrollments. So that's the $30,000-$40,000 overview, but if you have a question, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And I will turn myself off and wait for your questions.
Barb, anything? Tim? Krista? Jeff?
Do we, if we don't have an estimate now, do we know when we might have an estimate for how much more health insurance is going to cost?
Sure. I believe our cap is at 7% for next year. Is that right? 6 or 7%? Okay. So we do have a cap for next year. Unfortunately, that 6 or 7% actually does translate into a couple $100,000. So it's just because I think we spend around $6 million on health insurance a year. So the math doesn't get you to a pretty big number fairly quickly. We are running pretty good. When I looked at our numbers, we were in the 83% of claims. But that was before actually all the employees moved over to what is now courts benefits. So we haven't seen the new reports into, with everybody on the same insurance plan yet. So we'll have to see how that goes.
Any more, Jeff?
Steve, just a
Go
quick
ahead.
comment. We didn't have it planned, and I am so glad you asked that question, because one of the things we kicked around administratively is we know we have a cap on health insurance next year, but that is a big consideration that we don't want to overcommit some of our funds so that it creates a problem with our health insurance issue next year. So thanks for remembering that point.
Dan, any questions?
Yeah, thank you. How did the student numbers come out this year? Was it, did we estimate well? Did we lose money, or did we gain money there?
It depends on when you asked, when we estimated. We were a little bit higher than our earlier estimates, a little bit lower than our later estimates. So it's always hard to kind of triangulate that, but we're up. I want to say 40, 50 students from last year, head count wise. And we count them. We have open enrollment students, we have resident students. So, but head count, I think we're up around 40 or 50.
Anything else?
Also, I was wondering, curious as to what recommendations are going to be for the one-time expenditures, and whether there's any talk about including alternative energy or efficiency expenditures to actually help us to make the rest of our money go further and to better steward our environment.
We're still working on that list. In fact, we're going to be talking about it, I think, tomorrow. Off the top of my head, I don't recall anything specifically in that direction. I will share that we're getting ready to install the solar panels on the roof next door here. They're actually up there already. We're just waiting for the steel to show up so that we can erect them. So that will be a fairly significant improvement. But most of our heating and air conditioning plants actually in pretty good shape. There's maybe a couple more energy projects that we could do, but yeah, we're in a pretty good spot right now.
There's just one thing that I remember we had talked about at one point, and I don't remember which meeting we talked about it, was there are apparently some sort of gadget that you can get and put around some wires that go to a certain area of a building, and you can zero in on energy use in different parts of a building so that you can better feel where your energy is going, instead of just saying the whole building uses this much.
Correct. Actually, I do, in our capital equipment budget, I do have some of those devices budgeted. Waiting for the budget to kind of be firm, but the hope is to do that. You are limited to like 3 or 4 different circuits that you can actually narrow down into with those devices, but it is helpful. I monitor the one at the middle school daily.
Board members, I think you already know this, but the gentleman sitting to my left reviews and controls every air conditioning and heating system and ventilation system in the district. And over the last long time that I've been here, I can't tell you the number of times I've called him when I'm at a meeting and the system isn't on, and all of a sudden you can hear it spin up in about 30 seconds afterwards. My point in sharing that is we have, Andy has taken a very sustainable approach and a very energy conservation approach with air conditioning, with heating and ventilation. And while I'm sure there's more we can do, it feels like a lot of that, and to credit to the board, because his perspective and the board's perspective is sort of hand in glove in terms of sustainability and trying to squeeze every penny out of the utility budget that we can. We're in really great shape, because I'm in some other districts from time to time where when the air conditioning unit's on, everyone's wearing a sweater or jacket. And when the heating system is on, everyone's still wearing a sweater and a jacket. And we have it we have it balanced out to almost a science. And I have nothing to do with that.
I will say that this particular room, we've had some struggles with, but I think we're on the path to having that nailed down now.
A couple of things, Brian, as you're putting together the information for the board's consideration on October 23rd is there were priorities for staffing in April that we were given, and we did the first and second priorities. There were third priorities, and if those aren't on the table, some information to the board on that topic would be, I think, relevant. And the next question I had is another potential option that's not bulleted in number 3 is not spending it and putting it in fund balance. And I'd like at least some analysis as to whether adding money to fund balance has any impact on our financial status in terms of future bond rating and creating a history for Moody's or whoever does our assessment as we look forward to potential building with respect to potential growth. So if that is a potential positive impact by saving now instead of spending, I'd like to know that. Because one of the things I know that we heard with respect to our bond rating for the $54 million project was that we had a good track history of contributing and growing our fund balance at a conservative rate, but still increasing it. And then if we can do that through this budget, does that enhance our opportunity of maintaining or improving our fund balance? I don't know whether it will or will not, but
We will check with the experts.
that's at least a fourth bullet point that I think is worth exploring for ours. And then my last point is, the sooner you can get that information to us in terms of your recommendation, that would be helpful to the board. And then I would ask if the board members have any questions or want further documentation, route it through me, and I'll put that list together for Brian so that we have it well in advance of the 23rd, okay? That way we can give you, Brian, and the administrative team time to pull together answers so we're not scrambling that last week. Okay. Did that generate any other questions or inquiries on the topic? Okay, thanks. And we look forward to seeing that information as we move to the 23rd and approval of our budget and tax levy. But the news with respect to our potential mill rate of declining down to 11.56 per $100,000 of value is really encouraging. Next item on the information items is school calendar. And this is a Gina or Krista? Looks like it's a Gina. So Gina, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I will be going through our calendar potential options. We did take this to the policy committee just for feedback. And I guess to back up a little bit, in doing the calendar, Andy and I met with the OEA to talk about the teacher calendar, and we brainstormed some options. And Nate is correct that calendar B, we did not have consensus as a calendar committee because there were some concerns about it. So I wanted to explain why it's still out here as an option and what I talked about with policy committee. So if you look at calendar A is very much our traditional calendar. And in setting the calendar, we have a number of things that we have to make sure in there. We have teachers and licensed non-rep staff that have a number of contractual days. We have 3 holidays for staff, for school year staff per the employee handbook, and holidays for other staff that have to be incorporated in the calendar. We have to get in our number of instructional minutes, at least right now. And we also want to look at embedding PD throughout the school year, because we know that that is our best way to move student achievement, is to have PD throughout the school year that's meaningful and intensive. And there's several reasons behind that. The most important, I think, and Leslie can add to this, is that when we learn things, then we have time to go in the classroom, reflect on them, maybe change our practices and learn from each other and collaborate throughout the year. It's very difficult, especially given our substitute teacher shortage that all districts are facing in Wisconsin. It's hard to have pull-out time for teachers to collaborate unless it's scheduled as part of our calendar. So when looking at calendar A, if you look at it, there's only 3 PD days that are within the school year, and it's really a function of just trying to be able to fit it in because by state law we can't start until September 1 or later. So that means the earliest we can start in 18-19 is September 4th, and we've traditionally had graduation the second Sunday in June. So that would mean, and then we build in 3 snow days. So the earliest we can get out is June 7th if we have 3 snow days before graduation. So just in looking at it, one of the things that we thought is that it's really an exhausting calendar. From a staff perspective, there aren't a lot of breaks throughout the year. And so we just started exploring, well, thinking outside the box, what could we do a little bit differently? And one thing we talked about in calendar committee that was brought up by one of the OEA members was that in other school districts, they do have the seniors end early and graduate and then have the other students attend longer. So we just started looking at, well, what would that look like if that was something we were to try? And additionally, we do a lot of work with orchards, with the flu study. And one of the committee meetings when we were talking with the orchard doctors about, well, what are some things we could do to keep our students and staff healthier with the flu outbreaks that we've had? And the recommendation really surprised me, but that one of the doctors said, have more breaks, because we really see a decrease in the flu when staff and student have breaks, are not around each other, and can get some rest and come back to school healthier. And so keeping those 2 things in mind, as well as that teachers have continued to ask us for more professional development throughout the school year to collaborate with each other and to complete their learning pathways and to work on things such as equity, we just started to brainstorm what would a potential calendar look like where seniors were released a little bit earlier and the other students attended longer. And I completely agree with Nate that that's going to have instruction and for parents. And we wanted just to test the idea and get a temperature check to see if it's something that the community, our parents, our guardians, and our staff wanted us to keep exploring or not. And so if you look at calendar B, how that would work is that the seniors would still have graduation on June 9th, but then the rest of students would go through June 12th, assuming we had 3 snow days. If we have fewer snow days, then we would have students get out earlier. So we asked for this to be an informational item to really update you on that, and since the survey went out today, you may get questions about it as board members as well.
And we're going to have this as an action item, as I understand it, at the next meeting.
Yes, so I will
Okay.
have the survey results for you at that time.
Krista, was it, do you want this coming back to policy then for review and for reflection? I think I'll defer to you on that.
I think it would be helpful so we can digest the results if there's not a time crunch in terms of us having a policy meeting where we discuss this again using the results from what you get from parents as well as staff.
Well, we could set, I think our meeting is after the board meeting, so we could try to set another meeting before the board meeting if you'd like to do that.
That be possible? Can you check? And
Yeah, I mean, we can, Dan and I and
Okay.
Tim can find a time if they're in agreement that that would be helpful. I think the other thing is that, as we also look at this issue, we also would be good for us to put it in the context of what we're learning with Dr. Rickabaw's book in terms of this is structural on its face, but we also have to look at it in the context of learning and what helps students learn, what helps teachers teach more effectively.
Okay, any questions or comments with respect to the calendar, recognizing it's an informational item and that we'll be shooting it back to policy to look at the surveys as well? Barb?
So my question is about the exam issue for seniors. Is there have you talked about the possibility of the seniors having exams before graduation?
We talked about some options in calendar committee, but we have not talked about that with the high school administrators about what that would look like. If it's something that the community and staff tell us they don't want the board to explore, then we wouldn't engage in those discussions. If it's something that they do want us to explore, then we'd certainly have to have those discussions.
You mean explore the idea of having school days after graduation?
Yes.
Okay. I guess what I heard Nathan say, it seemed like the biggest concern is this idea of kids coming back and doing exams after graduation.
So what we talked about in calendar committee is that the seniors would complete their work before graduation, but you might have exams for other grade levels after graduation.
Okay.
Tim, any questions or comments right now? Krista? Jeff? Dan?
Just one thing that I noticed about A is in the doldrums of winter, we've got just one day off for students, which is a PD day, in 12 weeks. That's a long stretch, it seems to me, without anything in February and not till the end of March when spring break hits. I would like to maybe see something in February as PD or no school as it is in the B calendar.
Yeah, as I see the difference between the two calendars, it's to add 2 PD days in February and 1 in October, where our traditional choice was, and then those 3 days then are put at the end of in June 10th, 11th, and 12th after graduation. So we're adding school days there to create some gap or some times in February and October to give a break. Did I read that correctly, Gina?
You did, and we also asked on the survey, because we had a lot of discussion about that at the policy committee, is when is a better time for break? Do you want it in winter, or do you want it in when the weather's nicer? And so that is one of the questions on the survey, to ask people to rank their preference.
So,
Yeah, as a parent, I got the survey today, and there's some really good questions in there that ask parents to rank from 1 to 4 what months they prefer breaks in. So I think that'll be very helpful. And the survey also goes out to staff. My question is, would it be possible before the policy committee meeting to get feedback from leadership teams in particular? Because I think they are charged with looking a little bit more globally instead of individually, family, staff. So it would be interesting for us to have feedback from the leadership teams in terms of what calendar they prefer or would recommend. Just a thought, if that's not possible.
and to seize on your comment regarding a global perspective and the rickleball work, we've talked over a number of years about a calendar discussion that looks a little more broadly than this. Balanced calendar was part of that. One of the themes of a balanced calendar was to create more breaks during the school year that could be used for a number of different reasons. Number one is just going 12 weeks at a stretch is really hard on not only kids but on staff, and breaks are probably have a great educational value, although that's anecdotal by me as opposed to backing it up through research. But those are the things I think we should look at, and part of our ongoing conversation with the Five Levers and Jim Brickleball's work that's going to the leadership teams is, do we go longer into June, given that we can't start earlier than September 1 because of state legislation? Do we go later in June, recognizing if we're going later in June to create some spread during the year? And when's a good time to have that spread? Do we do it at that week between semesters to give teachers the time to clean up after first semester and complete grades and to get prepared for the second semester? Do we do it then, even though it's in the dead of winter? Do we go to trimesters? Do we move the semesters so that we finish before December, before the Christmas break, and start again? I mean, we've hashed all of that stuff out over the years as a board, talking about that. I think it's time to get that to the next level for conversation. We're intending to do that through the leadership teams and the Rickabaugh stuff. What's best educationally, rather than every year getting, and this isn't a criticism of anyone, it's what we've had is we've got a traditional structural calendar, we keep to that, and we keep trying to find 1 or 2 days where we've got some flex to kind of halfway get to some instructional value of it, which is only halfway at best, rather than dealing with creating a calendar that makes more sense outside the confines of this structure. So if that makes any sense, I'd like to get this to, probably not going to be in time for this calendar, the 18-19, but my hope is that the 19-20 calendar is one that we derive based upon work out of our leadership teams in the school and examining how that fits within the 5 levers and our 5 values stuff. So that's for visioning, or for policy committee. That's my 2 cents worth, and for visioning, Jeff, that's my 2 cents worth too in terms of where we go with calendar. I don't think I'm saying anything that Jeff, you and I have talked about, or Krista and Barb, we have talked about for a while. So, okay, Brian.
Perhaps the path forward for us with this is to take a look at the 18-19 calendar, and then maybe we do a task force for the calendar in future years, and try to lock down those issues that we know are important to us, which are giving staff and students breaks throughout the school year and matching that with some embedded professional development. That's been one of the tools that we've used when we have a big issue and a big question, to get various voices in the room and representation from our stakeholders. So my initial reaction to Steve's comment is I like the idea of taking care of 18-19 and looking a little bigger and broader and doing some study work on a calendar for future years.
Okay, so we got some work to do. Krista, why don't you coordinate with Gina and the rest of your committee members in terms of getting together and looking at that data for a recommendation to us from the policy committee, and then we'll put that on as an action item for the 23rd. Okay,
So,
Gina.
I have one more thing that I wanted to mention is that we receive feedback on the survey, so I want the board members to know this if you get questions, because we know that having those professional development days in the school year can be hard for some families that have young children. And so we do offer community ed programs for all children in our community, where children can drop in and we have activities for them. So I just wanted you to know that.
And Nathan, I think we understand your concerns, and we've talked about a little bit more here, and we're going to be working on this on the 23rd. So I would ask that your route of feedback would either be through Gina or Krista, and then on the 23rd again. Okay, great. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is number F3, which is the 2016-17 District Annual Report. Brian, that's yours.
Just a quick reminder, board members, that our next meeting on Monday, October 23rd, we will release the new version of our annual report. School leadership teams and administrators, and Leslie and I have been working on it since sometime this summer, and we're nearing a final draft that we're going to go to print on. And if you recall, last year at the last meeting in October, we shared the report. Principals also have binders full of information. We can't stuff every piece of information that's in their binder, in their student achievement binder, into this report. Remember, the goal of this report was to make it user-friendly and an attempt to engage more community members and parents in our student achievement data. We'll make that presentation in a work session, or at least that's what I've suggested so far to Steve. And I believe what we did last year was in a work session right here, And then we'll do our presentation. Board members are welcome to ask a few questions, but we'd really like your takeaway to be, take this information home with you, reflect on it, and then give us feedback. Last year, we had to push that feedback back a couple of meetings. We'd like to get that feedback at the first meeting in November if possible, but we're excited about bringing you version number 2, and our plan is to make it better every year.
Superintendent's report.
I have a couple of things, and I'm going to make sure not steal anyone's thunder. But first thing, it is always great to have homecoming complete and to have the homecoming parade complete without too much rain. We had a little mist in the air, but we had a window of opportunity. And if Jim Pliner ever tells you he's going to call you at 5 a.m., be ready for a text message about a half an hour before, because he was very excited last Friday morning for our conversation early in the morning. We felt really fortunate that we had that little break in the weather so that we could get the homecoming parade in, because that is certainly a community-defining event in the Oregon School District. I will say I got a little wet on Friday night at the football game, and for any of you that were there, you might have gotten a little wet too. And then all of a sudden at 8 o'clock, the storm went away, and it was dry after that. And our team won, which is always great on homecoming. The next day, the homecoming dance was well attended, and our students are like our students are 99.9% of the time, absolutely perfect. We had a really, really nice event for that day. And to me, one of the amazing parts of, and the opportunity for me to get out in the buildings on Friday morning, it's more than, it is a big community event for all schools, for all kids. And yes, there's an element of it that's around one particular sport, but that element is really embodied in all of our sports and in all of our activities. So thanks to having that in the books, and now we don't have to worry so much about the weather. When I was out visiting, I had the opportunity to visit with our new Schools of Hope tutor. We've had some challenges with our Schools of Hope program in the last couple of years, because we get these excellent young people who then get recruited into another position. And Lizbeth Solano, she has been with us since April. She told me last, I think it was Thursday or Friday, that we have about 30 kids placed at Oregon Middle School, which is really a strong number for only being 6 weeks into school. So if any of you are interested, or if you have time to be a Schools of Hope tutor, the middle school would love to match you up with a student. Steve mentioned a couple of times the Jim Rickaball book study. I believe Janie has sent that confirmation out to everyone. And Monday, November 20th, and Monday, December 4th is the book seminar. And I believe most of you have a copy of the book. If you do not have a copy of the book, Janie will get you a copy. We had a really cool event also on Saturday, and I'm guessing Krista's going to say a few words about that. Okay, I will go for it. I think it just worked out magically that this year was our opportunity to host a Badger Conference activity. We don't often get to hold Badger Conference tournaments at our school, but we hosted the volleyball tournament on Saturday, and all of the Badger Conference South schools were here. It was just a marvelous day, a little wet periodically outside, but I heard a number of positive comments about our school facilities, which you would expect. And just a reminder, we used all of our facilities. We didn't just use the new gymnasium. We used the field house, was used all day. And we have to come up with a better phrase. I like to call it the pre-2017 gym, because when we say old gym, that just doesn't sound right. The auxiliary gym. Okay, great. I don't like that term old gym, but all three of our facilities were used extensively, and overall it was just a very nice program for kids. Another exciting thing that happened on Saturday, there is a new hoop house in the district, and the owners of the new hoop house, Netherwood Elementary School. So if you drive by on the backside of Netherwood, you will see all of the metal, I'll call it piping, is up, and soon the plastic will get stretched over the metal piping so that Netherwood can have a hoop house just like the middle school and start to grow plants. And my last comment, I was visiting with Jason Zerwick, and he came to a recent Rotary meeting. He's working with a group of Rotarians on garden plans at RCI, so we are excited about that. And I hope you've noticed the theme. The green environmental approach is really very strong in our district. All of our schools have either gardens or hoop houses or a focus on sustainability. And our Healthy and Green Task Force, Leslie provided me with an update, and I'm forgetting the exact term, but I think Brooklyn Elementary School is a sugar maple school, which is better than a silver maple school district. So lots of exciting things going on, all in 6 weeks of a school year. So thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to respond to them.
Thanks, Brian. Next on our agenda is our future agenda, which is our October 23rd meeting, and you should have a draft of that agenda at your desk. As indicated at that meeting, we will formally approve a final 2017-18 budget and a 2017 tax levy at that time, and we also have on there the calendar for 18-19. I've added that, which wasn't on your draft. And then we'll also, as a work session, have the student achievement reports, and we'll talk. We probably may just sit right here and do that in this room on calendar instead of moving in for that presentation. And then talking about the OHS open house, which is on November 30th. So remember to save the date on your calendar, because we'll have a formal ribbon cutting with the completion of all construction, except maybe that building in back, which I'm not sure will be done by then.
That might not
Yeah,
be quite done.
okay, but close.
Close.
So I know everybody's really anxious to see what the new commons is gonna look like when they're finished with that. I've had a lot of people ask me about that, so that'll be fun. Anybody have any additional items that they'd like placed on the agenda for the 23rd, or think that we've missed? Okay. If you have anything, let me know, pursuant to board policy. That takes us to checkout of the board members, and I'll start over here. Dan, anything?
No, nothing.
Jeff? Barb? Tim? Krista?
I just had a quick, I did want to compliment Brian and Jim on the communication associated with the weather on Friday. I did receive a lot of compliments from parents that the school district handled that really well in terms of direct communication, repeated communication, keeping people posted, because homecoming parade is near and dear to a lot of people. So thank you for doing such a great job with that.
Which would significantly impact the public bidding requirements for school districts, and that would place a mandatory competitive bidding process for construction projects on school districts, which isn't in place right now. The WASB is advocating in opposition to that bill to give districts as much choice as they can, or discretion in terms of how they want to fashion their construction projects. We have used a process here with our current bidding that wasn't in line with the bidding process. It was more of a design build in our cooperation with Findorf and Bray. I think as I read this bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andy or Gina, that this bill would eliminate the possibility of us doing that potentially. So this is one that's a concern, so I don't know.
Yeah, we kind of had a hybrid approach. The components of the bid were bid out. Findorf worked as a construction manager, so that part I'm not sure how that would work, but parts of everything were done, were bid. It's just that they weren't in one big bid package.
So, but we have to take a look at that closely, because it impacts us as we go forward, potentially, as we are looking at our growth study. So we're following that. The other thing is Brian, Andy, and I are working on getting to some, financial comparisons as to where the district sits relative to other area districts in terms of spending and mill rate and taxing and equalized value of that, so that you've got something that would put us in perspective. I got a draft we're working on right now, so maybe we'll be able to get this out to you prior to our meeting on the 23rd to assist you in kind of looking at where we're at. I know my preliminary look at the numbers is we sit really well relative to our other districts, notwithstanding the fact that, we've had a couple referendums. The data I have doesn't take into account all of that, so we're updating it. But be in the alert. I'm going to get this out to you probably in the next couple weeks, so you have a chance to see that. Okay. Need one motion. I hear Krista first and Dan second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, board's adjourned at 7:26. Thanks, everyone.